everyone. So I'm coming to you today with a story from my years of activism. I think this one took place in 2011 or 2012. I can't really remember exactly, but I and my local group of stop porn culture activists decided to do a last-minute workshop at the Portland Anarchist Book Fair. Now, what the fuck were we thinking is what I think now in retrospect, but it was a learning process for sure, and I think, if I can talk about it and keep any women from making kind of similar stupid mistakes, then by all means. It must have been 2012 because I didn't really, it was 2011. It must have been like 2011 because I didn't really have solid, radical feminist perspective on transgender issues at the time. So that comes into play with this story as well. But anyway, so yeah, I don't remember exactly why we decided to. I think we got a message from the Stop Porn Culture National, and they had mentioned that there was this anarchist book fair happening, and then we should see if we could do a workshop or something. And our workshop was on porn culture in radical communities. I don't really know what we were getting at now in retrospect. I think a lot of the women were in the organization were just really burnt out from dealing with anarchists, really, and that sort of thing. Not me personally, but I had my stuff with that in the past, but I was, I was just interested in, maybe providing a space that would be educational or helpful to any women. But of course, no actual women showed up to our workshop. So anyway, we had a couple of days to prepare. It was myself and the other kind of younger member who was around my age that pretty much did the workshop entirely. We had a member that was or is a survivor of prostitution, and we're talking street prostitution, homeless prostitution for drugs. And she really, at that time, was very interested in telling her story, which I don't know if that's always a good thing. I think we need to be kind of mindful about how we talk about our stories, but I think for some women in certain circumstances, it's just so hard to finally get to the place where you admit that what you went through was, for one, not your fault in a lot of ways, or that it was traumatic after years of you telling yourself that you were in control the whole time and you were empowered, and the experiences you had were actually damaging to you. I think she was going through in her mind kind of figuring that all out. So I don't know, in retrospect, I would be really careful about how we open women up to violence by not giving them safe ways in which to talk about their trauma, because it's really shitty to just go on your spiel about what happened to you and then immediately have somebody tell you you're wrong. So that's just, I find it personally, just as somebody who's experienced it, I find it really disgusting. But yeah, so I also haven't been through that level of sexual trauma, so just to be real. So yeah, anyway, so she did her talk kind of just explaining her experiences and that kind of thing, and then we kind of got into how there was a great tendency within so-called radical communities to bully women into things like open relationships and into sexual acts that they're not interested in, that are actually like, you know, through the guise of presenting it as somehow a radical thing to do, that it's somehow transcending bourgeois kind of value systems, but in reality it's just the same, you know, female sexual like slavery that's always existed. So that was kind of our talk. But of course, like I said, it was all men who attended our workshop, you know, so we have like our female members and then a bunch of male anarchists. And one guy in particular, one little fucking like lumberjack looking little dude was like, with his little scarf, you know, was like, at the end of kind of our presentation and everything, he kind of wanted to like grill me specifically about more specific ways of understanding like how this it manifests. But basically what the guy wanted to do was to get me to like admit to like having been violated by men or something. And that's kind of where the conversation went. And actually like one of the like anarcho queers that showed up for the workshop actually stopped him once they realized that he was like actually stepping into the line of like sexually like turning me into porn, really, was what it was, which is just another thing, you know, like, and the thing that irritates me about, like, feminist, like, just activism and how women just kind of get thrown into these things, women have history, you know, we have knowledge, like, feminists have been doing this stuff for a long time. Young women shouldn't be put in that position, I feel, where they have to go through that when they're doing like activism. Like we should have this kind of knowledge already put into place if that's what's going on. And you know, I feel like there should be a lot more mentorship, at least especially if you know you're expecting young women to go into snake pits like that. I think nowadays, like in 2017, this was like I said in 2011 I believe, like yeah I think it was December 2011. I think it would be even more scary, honestly, to have some sort of workshop like that. I really don't even think it would be safe to. Like, I really do think you would be, like, physically attacked. And I did get the impression that people were there to disrupt. So, specifically, I mean, the other thing was, like, a lot of people kind of kept coming in and out. Specifically, men kept popping their heads in and out and just asking questions out of nowhere, which was really disrespectful, honestly. And then, like, one guy came in, and he was trans, and so he, like, I keep saying the group was full of men, but I'm sure he identified as a woman. And there were the two anarcho-queer guys that I talked about who kind of interceded. I talked to them for a while after the workshop, and they both were they wanted me to use gender-neutral pronouns. And this is the first time that anybody had ever asked me to use they and them. But it wasn't even really necessary. Like, for our conversation, if I'm having a one-on-one with someone, you know what I mean? So it was just like, okay, thanks for letting me know. So yeah, this kind of helped solidify, I think, after this experience too, a lot of my understanding of how the trans issue specifically intersects with and is in antagonism to you know, fighting the sex industry specifically. A lot of trans folks specifically are involved in the sex industry, and they're involved in a much more lucrative and empowered way than the women that I'm interested in, like, doing work for or helping, you know. So that was pretty it was pretty enlightening in that way that, you know, they are men and, you know, they want their ability to make profit off of making pornography, and they don't want that to be impinged. So, like, we just have to remember that. And then, so I kind of got more solid after this experience. But yeah, so yeah, like, one of the guys that was, like, coming in and popping his head in, the trans woman or whatever, he like, knelt down, and he, like, in the middle of our discussion, like, afterwards, he was like, I just have a question, like, who here is actually a sex worker? And so that was irritating. So, like, our members who had been involved in the sex industry, like, raised their hands kind of reluctantly. And he's like, oh, well, okay, that's good, you know, like, but it was also like, I just want to say this. It's not appropriate to ask that in a group of people. Who here is a sex worker? It's none of your fucking business. You don't know who is a sex worker, okay? First off, in most places, prostitution is illegal. So if somebody is a prostitute, they probably don't want to come forward about their involvement in illegal activities, especially in an anarchist event, which is going to have people, you know, there who are looking for people who engage in illegal activities, i.e. undercover cops. You don't put marginalized women in that position, ever. Do not do that. Like, don't ask people if they're just, it's just not okay. And it puts people in a vulnerable position, you know? And also so even if somebody is a prostitute that is okay, supposedly, with being a prostitute, at the time, it's still not appropriate. Like, for those reasons. There are so many reasons why somebody may not want to come forward about that, and they have every right to. You know, and that's the other thing, like, a lot of women who've been involved don't really want to talk about it or go there, because it's just something they would rather compartmentalize so they can live their lives too. So anyway, that's just a whole other side subject of this. Don't do that. It's inappropriate. Like, even if you're, like, supposedly supporting sex workers' rights, which I was so stepping upon by talking about porn culture, but whatever. Yeah, so, yeah, he was like, yeah, okay, that's good. And he's like, I just want to say, like, he got, like, he had listened to the one woman's speech, you know, at the beginning. And he's like, I just want to say, I'm really sorry that happened to you, but I think that, like, I think that pornography can really be empowering for some people, and we need to leave space for all that fucking liberal nonsense that anarchists are just so fond of fucking spewing for some reason. Like, we need to leave space for different expressions of sexuality and gender and blah, blah, blah. So, like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Right. So anyway, the workshop ended. A couple of our members pieced out. They didn't want to hang around, which was understandable. And yeah, myself and the other member who kind of did the workshop kind of hung around and talked to the two anarcho-queer guys who were wanting me to explain why they're making jerk-off videos for their partners, like, was patriarchal. And I'm like, dude. But he's like, well, if I make pornography for my partner, why is that patriarchal? Like, I don't want to hear about what you do. Like, really, I don't. Like, I didn't say that it was, but of course also that gets into the discussion about what pornography is, and I believe that pornography is it's the graphic depiction of women as subordinate to males, basically, in a sexual context. So any material which enforces this idea and sexualizes the idea that women belong in positions of inferiority to men, and that women are naturally inferior to men, is pornography to me. And yeah, most of what is, I don't know, like, people always go into, like, these conversations, they're like, what, I don't have a problem with porn, I have a problem with misogynistic porn. There's no such thing as non-misogynistic porn. If it's porn, it's misogynistic. It's within the definition of it. It's like the word itself, you know, Andrea Dworkin talked about this, like, in pornography, like, the term derives from a class of prostituted women who were the lowest of the low in ancient Greece. And basically they were women that you could do anything to, really. They had no rights. They had no humanity really bestowed upon them in that culture. They were basically available to any men who wanted to use them. So those women, we derive our modern word for pornography from them. And it really makes sense, because what's going on in pornography is the same thing. It's debasing women into, like, this subordinate class. So no, a depiction of nudity or sex isn't pornography per se. It is, you know, what is the message behind it, and pornography is made with intent to spread a message. So yeah, that was, I don't know, quite an experience, and I definitely wouldn't stay around and talk to a couple of anarcho-queers after something like that now, but I also wouldn't do an event like that now. It was totally draining, and it totally made us vulnerable in a lot of ways. But in a lot of ways, we had good conversations after it. We had conversations about, like, you know, deciding how to respond to, you know, being asked if, like, about the whole sex worker thing, because some women don't want to come forward about that. They really don't want to be sitting there or standing there and have that, because, you know, once you admit that, a lot of times in misogynistic men's minds, that's all they see. They don't see you as a person, and women too, women who have a lot of internalized misogyny too. They don't see the person, they don't see what you're saying, they don't respect you any longer. What you've become is the acts that you've engaged in, period. And that is why, you know, nowadays things like revenge porn and stuff are so damaging. It's damaging because we live in a culture that, once women have been exposed in that way, you know, they're consistently reduced to that. Consistently reduced to a sexual object. It's the easiest ways to debase a woman. It's the most common way that women are debased, and it's just, you know, it's very clear what is going on there. So, I mean, again, this is how the male psyche works, you know. They want women to be like these sexual objects, and at the same time, they punish women by reducing them to being sexual objects, because once you are that, you are nothing else. So, yeah, I've learned a lot, but I wouldn't suggest doing anything like that. Don't put yourself in danger around, like, fucking psychotic pseudo-radicals. Like, just don't. It's not worth it. You know, I was really surprised they even allowed us in, though. I will give them props for that, for giving us a space. Like, the organizers, that was really cool of them. So, nothing negative to say there, but yeah, I wouldn't do anything like that again. And I have no real interest in attending any more anarchist book fairs in my life. I've attended enough. So, yeah. Plus, I'm a tanky, technically, so that wouldn't work anyway. Yeah. It was an interesting experience. So, yeah. I think it's really important, I think, just to, I guess, give a lesson from it. You know, be careful about where you're putting your activism and who you're trying to educate and what your goals are. Like, really, don't just go to an event because there's this possible space there for you to have a workshop. you know, especially when you're organizing as feminists, you know, and trying to have, like, a women's space, specifically, like, that workshop we wanted to reach women, and only men attended. Now, why do you think that is? It's probably because I think any women who actually attended that workshop probably would have gotten shit for it if they were, like, actually interested in the topic. So there's that, you know, it's a very cliquey scene, and a small cliquey scene in the Portland area. So, like, you're going to kind of be looked at and talked to about it and kind of, like, analyzed if you do something like that. But, yeah, you know, it's just, like, we need to, like, be careful about that. There was no point in me telling men not to pressure women to engage in sexual behaviors if they don't want to. Men know that they shouldn't be doing that anyway. Like, I'm not here to educate men about that. You know, men are adults. They know what consent is. They know if they're doing something that violates a person. All right. And that's the thing I think a lot of, like, the liberal feminists and the anarcha-feminists and socialist feminists, all feminists that aren't radical feminists are just, you know, they don't get that men know what they're doing. You know, they're not stupid, they're not social. It's not a matter of them, you know, just being socialized to disregard women's boundaries. They know that they're violating your boundaries when they do it. It's not a matter of educating out of them. And I think that's a lot scarier to contend with, because then you have to realize that, like, there is something, like, that you cannot... When you realize that that's what's going on, it becomes a lot scarier, I think, for feminists to go there, because that means, oh, are they reformable? And then you have to ask yourself that. You know, is somebody reformable who consciously violates other people's, like, boundaries in that way? I don't know. You tell me. So anyway, yeah, that was my experience. It wasn't terrible, but I wouldn't do it again. I don't suggest doing anything like that. And I don't suggest being a part of stop porn culture either, but that's a whole other video, who knows if I'll make, honestly, because, like, that'll just be some fucking shit. You know, I got something out of it. I did get an education, but my education pushed me, you know, in a way that was further, like, more radical than that. I do want to do a video kind of about the Stop Porn Culture conference that I attended, which was amazing and terrible at the same time, so I'll probably talk about that in the future. But yeah, just kind of my synopsis of the time I organized a anti-porn workshop at an anarchist book fair. Yeah. Yeah. I will talk to you guys later. Thanks for listening.